Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The New Facebook Insights. And doing the webinar today is Ellery Long, your favorite social media manager. Just a couple things before I hand this over to Ellery. First of all, this webinar will probably be around 35-40 minutes is what I'm told. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so if you do think of questions along the way, go ahead and type those into the box that you see in the GoToWebinar window, and we'll be happy to answer as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. One question we get all the time is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, we are recording this, so you will be able to take a look at this later once we get it up on the website. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ellery.
Thanks, Jill. So Facebook Insights, we've done other webinars on kind of social media measurement in general, but today we're going to focus specifically on Facebook and on the free tool that Facebook offers to all company page owners called Facebook Insights. Hopefully, if you are registered and listening to this webinar, you already have somewhat of a bit of context of what Facebook Insights is. But we're going to start at the beginning and kind of move through all the different features. You may be aware, if you are a current Insights user, that towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, Insights went through a huge revamp, which for people like me who rely a lot on data and using that data to report to upper management, that was kind of a pain in the butt because a lot of their metrics changed completely. And the overall takeaway there is they actually changed for the better. It's just problematic for anybody who is tracking over time to all of a sudden not be able to compare apples to apples, if you will. So I got over it.
I'm glad to hear that.
And basically started with the clean slate in January for all our recording and reporting. So I wanted to go over with you what I know best, which is how I do it. And before we go into that, just wanted to give an overview of why you should be measuring, why it's important. What you should be measuring. There's a ton out there, and you'll see specifically with Insights, it's pretty endless what you could be tracking, and hopefully by the end of this you'll have a better grip on what's actually important to your business and to your objectives. And then finally, and what will be the bulk of this half an hour or so, is really just looking into the specifics of Insights. How do you measure? What do all those various metrics, like people talking about this, what does that actually mean, and what does it mean for you as a brand marketer? So with that, we'll start with the why. For one thing, Facebook matters. And, there's been a lot of hubbub over the last couple of weeks based on the Facebook IPO, which was less than stellar. Hoping that none of you guys are Facebook stock owners currently. But I will tell you, and I tell anyone who cares about my opinion, that I would still bet on Facebook. Perhaps it was overpriced in the beginning, and maybe it's coming back to earth as to what it actually should be priced at. But there's no denying the hold that Facebook has on the online world. Just a few stats to kind of set the stage and give you an idea. 1 out of every 8 minutes online is spent on Facebook. That's more than any other site on the web. And it's got business purposes too. So B2B and B2C across both of those verticals, we're seeing companies that are actually acquiring customers. That's real revenue generation coming from Facebook. Second only to email, which if you're a vertical response customer, we have you covered in both of these things. But Facebook is second only to email as a preferred way of sharing between friends. And a lot of that sharing is product recommendations, business recommendations. So, making sure that you have a presence and that your content is easily shared on this network is really vital to doing business today. And then these 2 last bullets, actually, this is hot off the presses. This is research that came in this morning, actually, from Edison Research. And Edison Research, you hear people talk about social media stats and whether you should really take them seriously because there's stats all over this anything. But Edison Research, for what it's worth, is the research and data company that provides the official presidential exit polls. So that's a pretty good,
So they
pretty
know what
good
they're
pedigree.
doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. And I just thought these stats on this report were amazing. 23% of Facebook users, and there's, as we know, 850 million of them. 23% of them check their account 5 or more times every day. I'm guilty.
Me too. I like to say it's part of my job, but it's
Well,
more
it really
your
is
job.
part of my job. And 47% of Americans using social networks say that among all the social networks that they use, Facebook has the greatest impact on purchase behavior among those networks. So 47%, not quite a majority, but that was by far the highest in the rating of what has an impact on purchase behavior. For some context, I believe Twitter was under 5%. Facebook is still, if the stats don't lie, Facebook is still where you want to be to try and influence purchase decision. But more importantly than how much Facebook matters, your business matters, right? We have a lot of accountability for marketing metrics, and you probably do too. You're using your reporting for email. You want to see if you've got your ROI set up with your vertical response account. You're paying attention to these things, and social media shouldn't be any different. It's kind of, well, really, it's well past its infancy at this point. And, it's time for you to give it the accountability that you do any business measure that you do. And fortunately, the tools out there to do this have finally caught up with the times. So there's plenty out there. We're going to look specifically at insights, but I'll actually show you a few other things that I think are helpful to stay on top of. And, ultimately, this is about saving time and optimizing your performance. So when I say Facebook matters, it matters to 850 million people, but it's not going to matter to your business if you're not doing the right thing with it. And just posting willy-nilly or when you have a chance, you're not necessarily going to drive results. So using insights to find out what gets you the best results is going to be a much better way to net results. The more informed your strategy is, the better results you're going to see. So what should you be measuring? When I talk about what's important for your business, what exactly should you be looking at? Well, here's what others measure, and I show it to you only to point out that the most measured thing, in my opinion, is the least important. So I'm trying to give you, and if you can't see that, it's increase and decrease in followers. In the beginning of social media, that's what everyone looked at. How many likes do I have on my Facebook page? And obviously, that's still what people are looking at today. I mean, this is a little less than a year old, so I'm hoping that things have changed a bit. But you'll see, and as we dig into what metrics are available to you, that follower count overall is not that important. But I wanted to let you know that, if you have only been looking at follower count, or you're still really, concerned with how many fans you have on Facebook, you're not alone. So I'm not by any means saying like, oh, how could you possibly be focused on this? The majority of marketers are focused on it, and hopefully after today we'll educate you a little bit about what other metrics might be more useful to you. So in that case, what you should measure. Now, there's so many different things out there, from likes to mentions. This isn't Facebook specific, this chart, but most of it applies. But I want to just get across the point that it's not the metric specifically that is important. It's your overall objective. So across the top, you see here some pretty typical marketing objectives. What do we want to achieve with any marketing program, and in this case, social media? So we've got awareness, influence, the power of your influence across your customers, engagement, going back and forth with your customers and really creating relationships with them, and then action, and that's really ultimately what you want, right? Whatever that action is, coming into your store if you're a brick and mortar location, purchasing something on your website, downloading a white paper, registering for an event. These are all examples of action that you can measure. So those are just, the white boxes are just examples of things that point to that, but I would encourage you to think top level first. Say, what's important to me? Am I a new business in a local area and I'm really trying to build awareness? Then let's really focus on the metrics that point to awareness. If you're a little bit more established or you're a sales heavy organization, maybe action is really where you want to look. And so before you start, diving into insights and really getting overwhelmed, it helps to go in with the idea of what exactly you're trying to point out and what needle you're trying to push. So what's good? This is a chart from a company called Social Bakers. They make social media measurement tools. They're not free, so I won't be showing them to you today, but they, in the interest of getting more business, often do pretty helpful reports like this. And I wanted to show you this average engagement rate is their own proprietary thing, but if you dig into it, it's essentially what Facebook Insights refers to as virality, which is going to be the number of people who saw your posts divided by, the number of actions that were taken on your post, stories that were created, divided by the number of people who actually saw them. That's your engagement rate or virality rate in Facebook language. And as you'll see, and I think I wanted to show this slide because I think it's pretty encouraging, is it's pretty low. Less than a percentage on across the board, no matter what industry this is. And these are big brands. As you can see by the gray bars, those are average fan counts. So I'm guessing that if you have, the least one here is 261,000 fans. If you have that many fans on your Facebook page, I doubt you're on this webinar. So you'll see, and there's studies to back it up, that the smaller the fan count is and the smaller your business is, those engagement levels tick up. But if you're looking at best in class and you really want to see, you see automotive here, is 0.2 percentage points is their average virality rate. And only pointing this out to show that that's achievable. And if you're looking at a 1%, for example, engagement rate and going, oh, what am I doing wrong? You're actually killing it. So you should be feeling pretty good about that. And timeline, those numbers I just showed you were from January through the end of March of this year, so that was both with timeline and without. But studies are showing that timeline is actually having pretty positive impacts on engagement rates. So this is from Wildfire Interactive, and they show this is less than 1 million fans and 1 to 10 million fans. Over 10 million fans are actually showing negative numbers, but again, that's probably not affecting anybody on this call, certainly not vertical response. But the less than 1 million fans, that goes across the gamut, and those are not numbers to scoff at. 67% people lift and people talking about this. Comments, likes are up there too, and this is really, to me, just validating that the timeline format, which was Facebook's goal from the beginning, is to make your content more engaging. And it seems to be, at least in the early days, having that effect. What I want to encourage you to do, though, is think about things relative to others, right? So every industry, as we saw in that chart 2 slides ago, every industry or vertical is going to be different. And furthermore, geographically, everything's going to be different as well. So instead of getting caught up on what other people are doing, particularly big Fortune 500 brands like, oh, Virgin America has so much engagement. If you're a cupcake store in San Francisco, comparing yourself to that is not helpful and a waste of time. So really focusing on yourself and looking at your own growth rather than specific benchmarks. So going in on day 1, say you have 500 fans, and say, I want 1,000 by the end of this month. That's less helpful than month over month looking at your growth rate. What you want is to always improve that growth rate. Setting arbitrary benchmarks isn't the right approach. And you can see down at the bottom, using your direct competition as a guide, that's the one place that I would suggest if you need something to compare to, looking at direct competitors in your space and vertical. But also, again, for example, we have a competitor who's a much larger company than us. They're a public company. They have many more customers than us. So to look at their fan count compared to our fan count, or any metric really, people talking about this, anything, wouldn't be helpful. What we want to do is look at the actual growth rates. Again, I say it throughout this webinar, comparing apples to apples. Just looking at, oh, they have 1 million fans to our 8,000, it isn't helpful. But if you go from 8,000 to 9,000 and they go from a million to 1,001,000, your growth is incredible compared to theirs, and that's what you should really be focusing on. And finally, establishing and use all that to educate yourself before establishing goals. So establish the specific goals you want only once you understand what's realistic. And so if you're not already measuring, then take a few months to see what your average growth is before you decide, okay, I'm going to set these specific goals. If you already have been measuring, great. Use that previous history to see what your average growth is across metrics, and then focus on trying to see that particular number build. Before we dive into Facebook Insights, I did mention that you could compare yourself directly to competitors. So I wanted to show you a couple tools that are free that you can use to do that. One is the most straightforward, it's just Wildfire has a free tool to basically entice you into using their paid tools. But this is free, and you can just type in your competitors and look at overall page size, which I said that finite number of likes is not important, but what you see here is the growth percentage over different time periods. So you can get a good idea, hey, if my number one competitor is growing, 34% over 3 months, like Walmart here, and I'm Target, and I've only grown 14%, I'm going to spend a little more time on Walmart's page seeing what they did. And maybe you find out they've just been running ads and it's, they're buying followers, but that's good information to figure out. If you want to get past follower count, though, and really get into the metrics that matter, there's 2 different companies that are doing some cool things. Essentially, it's stuff that you could actually do on your own if you had the time to go around to your competitors' pages, because another feature of the new insights is that some of the metrics, including likes and people talking about this, are now publicly available rather than just for page owners. But what Simply Measured does, and Zoom Social, which is the next slide I'm going to show you, is they take and kind of process that information into quick takeaways that you could easily take to your management and say, here's what we're looking at. So here on Simply Measured, a relative share of engagement, overall engagement in your space among the competitors that you defined. How much from a percentage standpoint are you getting here? And this is Jill's looking closely. It's beer. Obviously, Bud Light is dominating that relative share of engagement. And similarly, Zoom Social is another one, which I think is actually a little more powerful than Simply Measured, or at least I just like the interface and the way they lay it all out. But they take your growth rates, they take your people talking about those numbers, they look at posting volume, which is great. If you're seeing that one of your competitors is really beating you in a particular area, you can see, oh, well, they happen to be posting twice as much as me, or half as much as me. Maybe I'm posting too much. These are the kind of takeaways that you can pull from this. But again, engagement rate, like we talked about earlier, is a good apples to apples comparison, right? It's not just looking at fan count, it's looking at the number of engagement, likes, comments, shares per post that they're getting as a percentage of fan count. And so that way you can eliminate the idea that, oh, they're 10 times the size of us, and just look at specifically how many of those fans that they have are actually engaging with them. So now insights, what we're all here for today. How do I use Facebook Insights? Well, to start with, before you even get in, I want to talk about some keys to being successful with your measuring. For one, be realistic. Again, this is something that we're all learning together and hopefully attending lots of VR webinars to get tips on. But you're only going to set yourself up for failure if you shoot for the moon right off the bat. So again, use your historical performance to try and educate yourself about what realistic growth is. Ignore irrelevant metrics. As you'll see when we get into kind of the more advanced stuff for insights, there are a ton of metrics that are available to you. I would be shocked if you needed more than 10% of what Facebook can give you. So you're only going to hurt yourself in the long run if you just let yourself get too overwhelmed by the amount of data that's out there. too much is certainly worse than too little. You know, find the 5 metrics that you can really make a case about why they're important for your business and focus on them. Watch them grow and do some testing to see how you can push the needle across that. And that applies to anything we talk about when we start looking at the specific measurements is ultimately what you want to be focusing on is, okay, here's what I found out based on the measurement. Now, what can I do to affect this? Where can I push this needle? What levers do I have available to me to try and make a little bit of a pop in one or a couple of these areas? If you have not been, or I mean, really, if you have, but you want to try and revamp your metrics program, set a baseline and stick with it. Like I mentioned, when Facebook switched over their insights, they kind of ruined this for all of us, the baseline part of it. But
you just got a new baseline.
Right, you got a new baseline. So, but the only way you're ever going to make intelligent decisions based on your data is by having a baseline and consistently measuring the exact same metrics month over month and not switching around what you're doing based on, you know, a blog post you read yesterday about the new hot metric. There's always a new hot metric. Share often, as in share your results often and across your organization. So it's only going to do you so much good, you know, informing you what to post, but you want feedback from across the organization. So make sure that they're educated, you know, put reports together and make sure that everyone is in the loop and everyone is a stakeholder on what results you're seeing on Facebook. And finally, I like to point this out too, especially in a webinar like this where we're really going to focus on the numbers aspect of it and really quantitative measurements, but qualitative observations absolutely matter too. And in fact, I would argue when presenting results to, you know, the C-suite or executive management who doesn't really get social or perhaps isn't that invested in social, it goes a lot further to just show some examples of some great interaction, like a comment on your wall about how much a customer loves your product. That's going to ring true to the product guys or your CEO much further than, oh, we had a 12% lift in people talking about this month. So, you know, numbers are great, data is great, and it's going to be really good for you, particularly trying to figure out what kind of content is working. But, you know, make sure not to leave out the stuff that people can really relate to and understand on a visceral level. That said, let's get into insights. So how do you access insights? Hopefully on your timeline page, you've all noticed the big admin panel up top that it's pretty hard to miss. And right there, you have a little preview of insights, and you just click see all and you'll get in there. There are other ways to access it, but this to me is the most straightforward. And you're going to immediately be brought to an overview dashboard. And this and what comes directly below it, which is page posts, which we'll go into next, are arguably enough for you to run with if you don't feel like, you know, diving in deeper. The very first page of Insights, the overview dashboard, has a lot of great information on it. You know, the obvious here, total likes and friends of fans. Now that is a quantitative measure of just how large your audience is. But that's, remember, potential audience. That is not actually who you're reaching. The weekly total reach is going to be a much better indicator of real impressions. So total likes is how many people liked your page, and then friends of fans is representative of your entire potential reach. Because if those 5,900 fans on this page were all one day to share something about vertical response, then they have combined 3.2 million fans. So the idea that any of that's going to happen is pretty absurd, but it gives you, if you want to do, you know, overall share of fan counts, like, look, okay, my total reach divided by my friends of fans number is going to show you exactly, you know, what potential you're doing. And so that's something we'll talk about more as we go along. You can create your own metrics out of this. So maybe you want to look at percentage of potential reach. That's a metric that we just made up here on the spot. So you take weekly total reach, divide it by friends of fans, and you've got a picture of how good you're doing with your content at reaching the overall ecosystem of Facebook. People talking about this is specifically about stories created. So I want to get into just terminology and definitions for this particular dashboard. But before we do, just a quick look at the chart in front of you. The purple dots are a measurement on any given day, how many posts you had. So the bigger dots, maybe there were 4 or 5 posts that day. The smaller ones might be 1 or 2. And so you want to be able to look and see how your reach goes. And so here you can see there's a pretty steady stream going up. But if, for example, you had a purple dot that was relatively large, but you saw a dip in total reach, you'd want to dive into that and see why those particular posts didn't get seen by as many people, didn't get as many impressions. So these overview dashboard terminology: total likes, as we went over, number of people all time who've liked your page; friends and fans, your total potential reach; and weekly total reach is going to be the number of unique people, and that's important. These are unique visitors, and there will be areas later that show you how many times or how many pieces of content those unique people have seen across the week or day or whatever you're measuring. But weekly total reach is going to be a look at the number of unique people that have seen any content associated with your page. So that does include, and it's important to note, that includes ads and sponsored posts as well. So if you are doing any advertising, you're going to want to dig into your total reach a little bit and separate out, and don't worry, Facebook does this for you, but separate out what is organic reach versus paid reach versus viral reach. And the difference between those 3, organic is just what it sounds like, it happened naturally. Viral is what then is caused by organic reach. So if somebody shares something about you and it goes to their friends, that's considered viral reach. And then anything that's not organic or viral is paid. And depending on what your objectives of that advertising campaign were, that could be a good thing. But what you don't want to do theoretically is be spending a lot of money on advertising and still seeing your organic and viral reach go down while your paid goes up. Finally, the big metric, people talking about this. So this was the biggest and most noticeable change. Before, Facebook Insights measured everything just based on comments and likes, whereas now they're putting it all into one round-up number that shows any story that has been created about your page. And so here's a list of all the things that fall into that category. Someone likes your page, the overall page. Someone posts on your wall. Someone likes a particular post, comments on or shares it, and we'll look at what that means individually. If you're posting questions using the Facebook questions tool, any answer is a story created about you, responds to an event, mentions your page, etc. And if you have a brick and mortar location, if they check in or recommend those place pages, that counts as well. And so you see why they call this a story, because it's not something that is just happening between you and the customer. Any of these actions that a customer does is going to appear on their wall as activity that they've done to their friends. So their friends now see this activity that happened between you and the customer. And ultimately, that's going to get you more impressions. Below the overview dashboard is page posts. So this is now not looking at the page overall and performance, it's looking post by post. What's neat about this is that it's completely sortable by different metrics. So what I've done here is sort it by reach. So we're going to look at the very top, what got the best, and you'll see out of these 9 posts, it looks like 7 of them are photos and 2 of them are links. You don't see any text-only updates. So what we're seeing here, both by reach and by that virality measurement, is that photos are really resonating with our fans. And what we can also look at is among those photos, you can see, and I don't have each status message up here, but it gives you a post, and if you click through, you can actually see what the post is. But what we're finding is that pictures of like cool natural phenomena is really like setting our fans off. So
except for that first one. It was a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yes, that was. I actually have that later on in this. But again, and we'll look at it, actually let's just go straight into it because I'm going to look at each of these columns and what each of these things mean. So for one, and I will actually back up each one of these numbers, so engaged users, that's 623 you see there, or talking about this, 279, those are clickable. You can click them and dive in for more information to get more specifics on that. So starting with reach, the number of unique people who have seen your post. This, in classic marketing speak, is known as impressions. And these are actually people who saw it. So again, this is more important than how many fans you have or how many people could potentially see it. This is how many people actually saw that post. And because of the way Facebook's edge rank works, this number fluctuates a lot. And we actually, there's a blog post on EdgeRank.
Yes.
So if you're not familiar with EdgeRank or how to manipulate it, I would do a little search on the vertical response blog for Facebook EdgeRank. But if you click on reach, you can see exactly what I was talking about earlier. So where was that reach coming from? We at VR don't utilize paid advertising on Facebook very often. We're actually doing some testing right now. So if you see an ad, click on it. Well, don't, because we have to pay for it, and you're already a customer. But in this month that I was using for examples and screenshots here, we weren't doing any paid. But what you can see is what's happening organically versus what's happening virally. And arguably, virality is the most important. And so what you want to do is see that based on that total reach, how can you, look at which ones are getting a higher percentage of viral reach as a percentage of that total reach. Engaged users is the next column on that overview, and it's the number of people who have clicked anywhere on your post. So that could be if it's a picture post, they click on the picture to view it larger. It could be that they clicked, negative feedback. They could have said, hide this from my page. It's any click that happens. Even if you tag another page in your post and they click on that, that'll come as a click. But it's also going to show stories created. And so you can see when you click into engaged users, that's the pie chart on the left, it's going to show you photo views, other clicks, and then stories generated. So this one was from my photo post, one of the ones that was on the other thing. So the photo post had 337 engaged users. And it makes sense, goes to follow that, photo views, enlarging the picture, is going to be the largest proportion of that. But then it shows what proportion of that is talking about this. You click into talking about this, 83, and it gives you a further breakdown of what exactly they did to talk about that post. So this is going to give you the number of likes on it, the number of shares on it, and the number of comments. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when somebody likes your status or even comments on it, it much more rarely shows up in their feed going out. So if you're really looking to build virality, which you should be, shares are a really great metric. And it's sometimes you just see this intuitively. You'll see a post that didn't have very many impressions, but its virality was through the roof compared to something that had a ton of impressions. And then if you break into that number and you look at talking about this, you'll see how much bigger the shares were as a proportion of what that talking about this metric was. And so those shares are a great way to get your content out in front of eyes of that elusive friends of fans number. So look at this and ask some questions about it. How are your users interacting? What are they doing? Are they liking more than anything? Well, maybe you'd like them to comment and kind of get that extra effort out of them. So perhaps your posts, you put a photo, instead of just saying, hey, this is great, do you like it? Ask a question about it. Have you ever, seen anything like this? Or tell us about, we sometimes post a cool travel location on something, hey, tell us, have you ever visited this place? Things, you have takeaways here based on what you're trying to lift that can help sculpt what you're doing. And you can also see, it's not illustrated here, but when are people interacting most? So if you go back to that and seeing dates and times of your post, which ones are seeing the most lift? Which ones get the most shares? And that can help you figure out, how to optimize your time and date of posting. And lastly, virality. So there's that number that, or the photo that Jill mentioned. It's the night shot of the Golden Gate Bridge on its 75th anniversary, which was, I guess, 2 weekends ago, 1 week ago. And so you'll see we got a 14.73% virality on that post. Now remember, way back in the beginning of this deck, I was saying that 1% was a pretty great number. So you can see, obviously we took some notes on this. But the point, what you want to do, and again, here it is, comparing apples to apples, right? So you look, And that third one down, or the second one down, has only a reach of 1244 versus the third one has a reach of more than double that. However, the virality is lower because that talking about this number is so much lower on the second post. So, if impressions and awareness, or just getting your customers to see you, because again, impressions is mostly going to be existing customers on there, then you're doing good. And yes, reach, number two is where you want to be for that second post. But if you're really trying to get the talking about this metric up, you're going to actually, as a takeaway, look at that third post and see what it was about that really engaged people. Um, and virality, as I said before, and we'll you know hammer home now, is that this is really the best indicator of what content is triggering engagement. How many people see it just means that it's showing up in the newsfeed. What you really want to do is have them think about it and engage with it in various ways. So really look at that virality number. It's a percentage, so you don't have to worry about overall reach and how it compares, and just see what's working. Once you dig in a little more, the next tab on Insights, once you're out of the overview dashboard, is going to be what they call likes. You can see that across the top. We've got overview, likes, reach, and talking about this, and we'll look at each. But likes is going to give you a good idea of who your fans are. And I'm not going to show in this webinar because it would feel repetitive, but in reach and in talking about this, you're going to get similar numbers, but they're not going to be, you're going to get a similar view of demographics, but they're going to be specifically of the people who are actually seeing your content. So I would encourage you to compare between the demographics of who likes your page versus the demographics of who's actually engaging with your page, and see if there's something that you're doing that's affecting that. So you can see here, our demographics of our likers is really evenly split. That's a very even distribution, and between male and female, for example, a dead tie at 49%. But for example, if I were to look over at people who are talking about this and their demographics, if I saw that 60% of people talking about my page were female versus male, I would see that doesn't necessarily match up with my overall demographics. So, a question to ask is like, what am I doing that is appealing to the female fans of the page, but being lost for the male fans? Am I, posting too much about Pinterest or whatever it is, and maybe trying to mix it up a bit? Unless you don't care, or your customer base,
skews
one way, and you look at this even split of 49 and 49, and you're like a maternity store, and all of a sudden you're wondering, well, what am I doing wrong? The other thing you get from demographics is where your fans are. So if you do any international business, you might see that languages and countries varies a lot, and Facebook will allow you to do geographic specific status updates. So if you're seeing a huge growth in any particular country, say United Kingdom here, maybe you do some status updates that are only for your United Kingdom fans. Hey, congratulations on the Jubilee, or whatever it is, trying to engage them and seeing if you can lift that as well. The second part of that likes insights is going to be sources. Where are your likes coming from? So for one, you can look at that by date and really see when you're seeing spikes and try and compare that to the activity you had. But I think even more importantly is unchecking that new likes box and looking at unlikes. What is possibly causing people to leave? Are you seeing a big spike in unlikes when you post more than usual on a particular day? And maybe your posting frequency can be adjusted based on that. You can also compare likes to unlikes to see what your churn rate is, and that's another metric that Facebook isn't directly giving you, but that you can back out of. And so, and also a good way to look at, well, if I can keep my churn rate down, then a couple unlikes here and there, I shouldn't take personally. The next tab is reach, and this is going to show you how you've actually reached people. So here we see that breakdown that I spoke about earlier between organic, paid, and viral. And we're also seeing the other thing I mentioned, that is looking at how many posts any individual user is seeing. So what you see here is a real spike into the 6 and up range. Most people are only seeing one post any given time, but then there's another spike again at 6 to 10, and what that represents is your super fans. These are people who are clicking on all your stuff, because the way EdgeRank works is the more you click and the more affinity you show for any particular page on Facebook, the more of their content you're going to be fed. So these people who are seeing a lot are engaged customers. So if you can boost that number in the higher end, the 6 to 10 and the 11 to 20, that's showing that you're doing a good job of building more engaged fans. We also see visits, and this is kind of like Google Analytics, if you're trying to see where the traffic is coming from to your page. And ultimately you're looking, how are they finding your page and what are they looking at? And use that to kind of dictate your strategy. If you're seeing that most people are coming from your blog or your website, maybe you should make that more prominent on your homepage, the fact that you have a Facebook page, and see if you can push that number up. If you're seeing that people are looking at the About tab or a contest you might be holding, that can tell you, oh, that people are engaging with my contest far more than they are with my photo tab or even the timeline. So using that to kind of put a strategy together of where you should be spending the most time on your Facebook page can be a great way to get more engagement as well. And finally, I just want to wrap up by showing what I just went over, I think is totally sufficient for almost any business, any small business across industries. If you are a larger business, or you just are a total data geek and you want to get into it more, or your boss is just demanding more stuff, fear not, there's plenty. Facebook's will give you a ton. If you want it, you just hit export data, and you're going to get a dialog box here where you can select a certain range. I personally, and I'll show you a few examples, I do this weekly and track it on a weekly basis. So every week I'll download a data set. And I really, for Facebook, pretty much just look at page level data. Post level data, you get a pretty good picture on that thing I went over, page posts earlier from the very first screen of Insights. Unless you're getting really, really deep dive, I don't think that post-level data is going to help you that much. But page-level data has a lot to it. So much, in fact, that I just wanted to illustrate here what you get when you export that. So you can see,
wow.
you can still scroll to the right. That's 64 columns of data. And that's just the beginning. Then there's all the individual tabs underneath, which have multiple columns of data as well. The point I'm making here is only that you don't need all this. You need to find the ones, like I said, that matter to you. Pick them, set that baseline, and forget about the rest. So from a workflow standpoint, what I do is I download the whole doc, but I've got my own doc that I've made where I take the metrics that are important to me. So this is what you're seeing here, maybe roughly a dozen metrics that I took from that 64. These are the dozen that I am tracking on a weekly basis. Then you can start to make your own. If you're comfortable in Excel, you can make your own charts. You can put some pretty graphics together for your exec suite or anyone else that you're showing to. But you'll see, I just break it down by week, and then I do a monthly total, and I can report month over month or week over week. And these particular metrics are enough for me, as well as what I pull out of it. So I mentioned earlier, creating your own metrics. So maybe you want to look at people talking about this versus your total impressions. So you've got the data here now to start creating your own measurement points. So come up with 5 or 6 numbers that you can make a case for and why they're important to your business, and just on a regular basis take that data out and shrink it down to the data that's important. I think that's it.